I'm going to start with just why I think environmental economics is so important. I've been working on it 20 years. It actually, perhaps when we were asking what's our passion, I should have said that. I think it's really important. And why I think communications is really central to this whole endeavor. It's not a support function, really. It's not an add-on, it's essential. And I think we're at a stage now where that's becoming more and more realized by funders, by the community at large. And so I think there's a lot of room for growth. But, the work that you're doing, I think, is absolutely central. It's not just a little add-on or at the end. Then I'll talk a little bit about this issue that's come up, I think, of the translation between the two languages, the two cultures, scholarship and policy. And then I'll just go through some experiences, lessons learned, things that have worked for us, things that I'd like to do more of, and then after that I would like maybe just so people to feel free if they have questions or challenges, and we can all think through together and then tee up how we can all work together going forward. Very good. So why environmental economics is so necessary. Karin asked me to sort of make this point, and I said, oh gee, I'm a communications person. The pressure's really on. So I don't know if I did a great job, but I did want to say just personally why it's a passion for me. And I think it's really unique, and it takes this broad view. And it's this view that the kind of world that we want to see for everyone, especially for our kids and future generations, is going to require that we take into account that we live within the context of environmental systems, basis in natural resources. And there's a lot of organizations that make that point. There's a lot of people who make decisions about thinking about the environment. But there's not a lot that sort of take both sides of it. So we do need economic well-being. We can't just think about protecting the environment. We do need to lift up people's capacities and capabilities in the long term. And we need the environmental protection. And if we want to have the environmental protection that we want to see, the solutions have to make economic sense. If they don't make economic sense, we're not going to get where it wants to be. So that, I really think, is the unique thing that environmental economics brings. And the other thing, I think we talked, Daniel and I were talking about this, that if you're an economist, you actually have some access to the policy making. They don't bring in anthropologists, they don't bring in sociologists, they don't bring in philosophers. I think they should, but they do bring in economists. So it's also a responsibility, I think, to carry this way of thinking. So that's really what inspires me. It inspires me to come to ADIS and work with all of you. Okay, scholarship and policy, two cultures. So what I say is the scholars will zoom in and the policymakers zoom out. So to do the kind of excellent research that really will stand the test of time, you really have to dig in deep. Just and make sure everything has the most detail. You've dotted all your I's and crossed your T's, and you can be really proud of that. This research is going to stand the test of time, and then be able to use by others as a sort of long process. Now, a policymaker has a lot of things that they're thinking about, not just the detail. They're stepping back and they're saying, I have to worry about the political context, I have to worry about budgets, I have to worry about how this works in with other goals that I have, not just your research. So both are right. We need to zoom in, we need to zoom out. So we have to make these two folks communicate. So I found a paper by an obscure economist named Thomas Sterner that's on the RFF website, and again, the scholars are very comfortable with complexity. You like to large data sets and Roy's identity and quasi-convexity and all these things that I knew at one point but I'd forgotten. This is what the policymakers want. Can you just tell me what's the answer? I don't need to know all this stuff. Don't go into just give me the bottom line. And that tees up this other variation of that is the scholars appreciate nuance. That, well, mainly this works, but it's not totally applicable in this situation, and we all have to find our way. And so we're at the centers of EFD, and every EFD center is different, and then maybe CETA's like, well, no, we want the action plan, just give us the same action plan. So you also have to translate this comfortable with nuance, and everything's different with, okay, so here, what's the role for communicators? And I think that, if we do the research and it isn't heard, I mean, like I said, I hope all of you have the same passion for environmental economics that I do. It's not just to write papers and get more funding and write more papers, it's actually to make a difference in the world. And so if it isn't heard, it's squandered. And even worse than that, we don't want decision makers doing 1 + 1 = 2 and black and white decisions and just only looking at the big picture. We want them to be informed by good research so they make good decisions. So what can communicators do? So I think working, and this is in the context of people who work in centers, we need to help our scholars understand and emphasize the context in which they work. But this is actually, the things we're working on affect real people, real decisions, and also have to sit into a context where we'll be taken up. We have to put things in everyday language, and I think we're going to have a lot of work on that. I think it's very important to be able to do that, to communicate this. I love the grandmother slide, and I'm going to steal that, Karen.
I guess I stole it from you.
Yeah. And then I'm going to say we're going to help them craft simple messages. And I have a little point here saying message is paramount. I think coming with a real clear message that you can explain very simply in a sentence or two to people is the foundation for all the other communications you want to do. We can talk about websites and webinars and podcasts and interactives and all this fancy stuff, but it all comes down to if you have a good, strong message that your scholars are comfortable with, that you're comfortable with, that you can. That's where it comes out. So you're going to see this a couple times because I think message is paramount. So if there's a message from this presentation that you come away with, I think it's really focused on message. So thoughts on context. So I hope no one gets offended by this. I was a researcher myself for many years. A lot of times I'll see a lot of papers begin, in recent years, blankly blank is blank, policymakers are interested in blank, and economists, and then goes right into the we did this study. And at RFF, we were really good at coming up with the research and the solutions, because research points to solutions, but even the solutions are kind of boring. A lot of times it involve things like information sharing or, some kind of incentive here. By itself, that's interesting, but if you find out, well, this is a way that will reduce mortality, morbidity, infant mortality, will protect open spaces. It says, oh, really? And so you need to information sharing, allow that to happen, then it becomes powerful, then it becomes interesting. And so I think in general, a lot of early on, we didn't do enough to motivate and that's actually a piece of jargon that when it's used by, it's this term motivation. It's like, well, I didn't know what to do, but I got motivated because someone said, that's not what we want to do. It's real problems, right? And we don't do enough to sort of explain the problem in the context. And I think that can get people more excited about the work. Thoughts on clear language. This is a quote from Winston Churchill, and I will say that this is very English-centric. So he said, old words are best and short old words are best of all. Now, if this were German, I'm not sure if that's exactly how they view it, but so I'm assuming this really applies, but this is the notion of the grandma language that we were talking about. And so I think when communicating to policymakers, be ruthless in taking out the jargon. Really take it out. And also realize that there's things that you don't think are jargon. You think externality is not jargon. It's jargon. It's jargon. And you wouldn't believe how often I change the word is heterogeneous to varies, right? Not even, but it's easy to forget too, because I read it all the time, and you get kind of marinated in this stuff, and you think, oh yeah, this is how everybody talks, and so, it's really, really tough on that. And I also say look for long sentences, if it's more than 25 words, I break it up. Now, if it has to be longer than 25, that's fine, just know that you're doing it. You know, sometimes you're going to have to break all these rules, but when you break the rules, know that you're actually just going to do it unconsciously. And so what I tell my researchers is like, can you tell me what your paper says in under 20 understandable words? And that's hard. That's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes you can't do it, but it's very useful exercise to try. Message of my presentation, thoughts on messaging, why it's so important. This is Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so I think that this attempt to explain things simply will actually help you as a scholar or your colleagues as scholars understand their own work better. And one thing I've learned the hard way is if you cram too many messages, you end up with no message. And no message increases the likelihood that the work is going to be mischaracterized, misunderstood, not used in the right way. And so getting the message right is also a way for the researcher and your research to have some power in how it's used. You know, being around the sort of policy process, the one thing I've learned is that at any policy decision, somebody has to get up at some point in the process and say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's why this is better than all the other things that we could consider. You can have more control over how that conversation goes if you have a better message up front. If you don't have a good message, don't come complaining to me about how your work was mischaracterized, because you didn't do a good job. So I think the scholars have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to help them to make sure the work is, you know, this great work that's done is used in the right way, and I think message is key to that. So I think this is really important. And so the other thing I would say is, you know, it's the opposite of I think we're going to go into this a little bit today, the opposite of the academic template where you sort of set something up and then you talk about what you did and then you come to the end, here's the punchline. There used to be a thing called DVD that you could rent and put in and watch a DVD of a movie, and it would come with all these extras. And there'd be the movie and there would be the making of the movie. And I'd say, you scholars, all you want to do is present the making of the movie, right? You're saying, you know, it looks like it was cloudy that day, but it was actually sunny, and we put some CGI in there, and that's fine when you're talking with other folks, but most people just want to see the movie. So start up front. I had another anecdote when I was first started, and I was talking to my folks with this long report, and I said, you know, that last section, you got to put that right up front. This was Alan Krupnick, so I think some of you know Alan Krupnick. So you got to put that right up front, Alan. He said, but you just said that was the most important part. And that's the difference. You know. Okay, one thing that I have learned being at EFD is that there's an inordinate fondness for pyramids.
Love it.
So we have a pyramid here. I have a pyramid. We were talking, you're going to have a pyramid?
Yes.
So we don't want to confuse things with, so you'll be able to identify different pyramids. If nothing else, you'll be able to identify different pyramids from this exercise.
A selling point.
Yeah. So this is something that I use, just sort of a way of thinking about things at RFF, which I think is helpful conceptually, and I call it the communication pyramid. And similar to if you're in the suburbs of Cairo and you might look up and you see the top of the pyramids, that's a signal that there's a big body of work there. And the foundation is the study. The whole thing can't exist without the study, right? So, but most people, it's long, it's big, it's math. Most people are not going to see it. Most people are going to be farther away. And so you move up with a blog post or an issue brief, maybe a one-pager, key points. And what I like about this is that it gets away from, I think, a very kind of toxic opposition between, oh, your study's so boring, no one's interested in that, I want you to do, like, you know, zippy, you know, ad kind of stuff. No. We can't have this without this. But if we just have this, a lot of people are not going to see it. They're not going to know it exists, and not going to be there. So that is the purpose of all these other products, to let people know that this is there. Okay, so I want to talk to you just, you know, how some practical things that we do at RFF. And again, and here's where I'm getting into the recognition that not everyone has the same, you know, resources, but things that we've done together to make things just a little more efficient and make it easier to do these things if we're able to do it. Maybe not now, but maybe something to build towards. So here's a paper, and you can't really see here, but there's the typical sigmas and deltas and epsilons. We put it on our website, but we also put summary and key findings just so someone can just read that very quickly and make that decision as to whether it's worth diving into. And so I'll show you here, this is, again, this is a paper, this is a website. So I have this summary. This summary is 117 characters. And so there's a couple reasons for that. One is actually people do better working under constraint. And the interesting thing about 117 characters is when you add in the link and the hashtag, it's 140 characters, and so you have your tweet pre-written. And the other thing is then you have, so let's say someone says, well, I want to see, could you give me a handout of all your work on cook stoves, say. You can just have a list and you have a one-sentence description of each paper in the can, and you can just, here's the title, here's what it says. And it's just very easy to put things together and reuse them. And then we also have the key findings, 3 points that we try to put into what we would say sort of simple language, the grandma language. I'm not sure if it's really, we're not really right there at grandma language yet, but we're doing the best we can. And so let me just show you an example of what the summary is. Market forces explain much of the U.S. electricity sector NOx emissions reductions in nearly all coal plant retirements. So the next time you're talking about NOx emissions with your grandmother, this is how you say it. Key findings: causes of recent U.S. coal plant retirements have been highly controversial. We use a new highly detailed model of the U.S. electricity sector to analyze regulations of nitrogen oxides, which harm human health and the environment. Weakening regulation would have little benefit for coal plants and would reduce emissions. And there's a little bit of a formula here of sort of context, what we did, question, and then the bottom line. And so trying to drive to that, I think, is if you can build that into your workflows. And so what we have is something called the editing transmittal check worksheet. So we don't start editing the papers for them until they at least submit the first go-around of this. We iterate on that. So you build it into the workflow. So it's not like you've got a paper that says, oh my gosh, now we got to go back and do this, do that. You can make a little checklist of these kinds of things to build in. And it may not be exactly this for everyone, but I think that's something to really strive for, is getting these kinds of things into workflows, and that just makes things a lot easier. So the point being that it's not easy, and it's not always the communications is right and the researchers are wrong. It's a collaborative process, and trying to be true to what they want to do, present the work in the way that's most likely to resonate with the audiences you want to reach. And then you also, it's really designed for online experience, and so we're going more and more into webinars. The podcasts are also kind of fun because it's a way to talk about in a more conversational way, and you can go in different directions and somewhat. So Karin asked me from lessons from experience. This is really my motto. Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes, and so if that's the definition, you have a very experienced communications professional here. I mean, many mistakes, and we've learned from them. So I just want to pass some of this along to you. So what works? Audience research. And I think this goes into a lot of the things we talked about yesterday. Down to growing up, what are their interests? How do they want to receive their information? I think one of the real transformative moments for RFF communications was a major project we did over 10 years ago on climate policy in the U.S. And we met with congressional staff and we said, what are the things that you were thinking about? Where do you want to be educated on? They told us, and how would you like to present it? What works for you? And so we like these short little tutorial issue briefs, research briefs, the kind of thing. It would be great if you had like a list of key points. They gave us exactly what they wanted, and That informed, we knew that the people were interested in the subject matter, and we knew how they wanted to get it. Experimenting, things change so much, you need to experiment, try new things. I've learned the hard way that anything you experiment with, you should have a plan to unwind the experiment. So if this doesn't take off, how do we back out of it? So you don't end up with a lot of things on your website that like, so what was this? You did this, and like, you do it anymore? So where we experiment is our blog. It's a very kind of flexible sandbox, so we can, even now, we do a lot of podcasts, but we still put it in the blog. I'm just got to the point where maybe I'll have a little podcast section on our website, but I'm not totally sold that we're there. But it's a good way to use your blog as a place to experiment with different kinds of things you might want to do. If it takes off, then you can make it a more formalized thing. Again, short, straightforward titles that sort of amplify the message, and these long, jargony titles and these puns for titles, which drive me nuts. It's a very academic kind of thing to do, to begin with a pun, and then a colon, and then a very long piece. But I think it's where a lot of researchers exercise their creativity at the end of the process. And I understand it's great for journal articles, but for policy, where we have the most hits are things like the impact of carbon pricing on U.S. industry. Like, we get tons of hits for that. If it's something generally, seeing the forest for the tree, some colon, generally equilibrium analysis of carbon pricing, you don't get as much. So some recent trends that I'm seeing at RFF, we're seeing increased comfort with blogging. It took me forever to even get the concept of the blog accepted by some of the older folks. The younger staff who are picking this up, we got most of our traffic through the blog. Not most of our traffic through the blog, but the blogs are read more than discussion papers for sure. So take advantage of your stock of knowledge, whether it's your experts or past research. And the blog is a really good way to do that. So I'll give you an example. I'll begin with this one. This was on the blog. So I was talking about adaptation to a changing climate. We released this report in 2011, and it has just tons of recommendations for the U.S. on what you should do for adaptation policy, whether it's reforms to the flood insurance program, to creating a heat warning system, so people will know, to help take steps to protect themselves from heat waves. Didn't get a lot of traction. Then with the hurricanes and the flooding, there was a lot of news stories of people saying, well, adaptation now has to be a part of U.S. policy. So we quote the former FEMA director, which was on the Today Show in the U.S. saying, adaptation has got to be part of disaster policy. And so I just wrote this blog and said, well, 6 years ago, we did a major study on this, and any policymaker looking at this should be one of their first stops to read this. There's just tons of good research. For example, this, and here's the link to it. This took me, probably about 45 minutes to find the links. But it's just a way to sort of then, rather than say we need to do a whole new study, say we have this on the shelf. We did this, and here, this is an example of expertise, and it's also an example of how context can make things really helpful. Okay, so I was talking here about what I call the ideal world versus the real world. And so the ideal world is we have communication involved early in every project. You'd have enough resources to pursue all the latest trends. You'd have enough time to give every project the attention that it deserves. Well, we don't live in that world, unfortunately. We live in the real world where despite best intentions, you'll be consulted at the last minute all the times. Your budgets are constrained. You don't have enough time to give every project its due. So living in the real world, I say you prioritize. I would say first, just always strive to helping scholars craft the clearest, most compelling message. I really think that's the foundation for doing all this other kind of neat stuff. It all begins with good, clear messages of what you're doing, why it's important, etc. As I mentioned, as you come up with your outreach vehicles and you want to make sort of a standard part of everything, just build it into your workflow. Build it in and always say, so when we edit the paper, we're also going to write a tweet, we're going to write key summaries. So it's just part of the process, early on. prioritize. If resources are constrained, just try to do one or two things really well each year. I think what I found is funders would much rather see like one or two real big hits than a lot of stuff that doesn't get off the ground. Take advantage of your research stock. What I just mentioned, all the things at your proposal. And then build connections with other communicators. I've learned so much I have my monthly meetings with the folks at the different think tanks, and at the very least, it's good sort of therapy. Right? You can sort of go over war stories and frustrations and disappointments. But I've learned a tremendous amount, and that's really why I'm so excited to be part of this gathering, because I feel like I've built a lot of connections with a lot of other communicators, and I want to keep that going forward as a way that we can continue to learn from each other.